In 1931, America built a machine to make the dead speak. For 3 nights, every radio across the country went silent, then screamed. The government buried the truth beneath miles of wire and concrete. But the hum never stopped. If you listen closely, you can still hear them in the static. The Glasshouse. The Seance on Waverly Hill. The first time Dr. Henry Alcott heard the dead speak, the voice came through a broken radio. It was the summer of 1927, and the air in Boston's Back Bay shimmered with heat and electricity. From the window of his laboratory at Miskatonic University, Alcott could see the harbor like a dull blade of silver, the slow-moving tugs trailing smoke across the water. Inside, the air smelled of solder, dust, and ozone. Wires snaked over the benches like veins. Tubes glowed faintly orange. The voice had been an accident. At least, that's what he told himself later. He had been testing the new crystal receiver, a fragile thing made from a germanium chip, a spider web of copper wire, and his own curious conviction that electromagnetic waves might, in theory, record human emotion. When the static on the frequency shifted into something like speech, he froze. Henry. A woman's whisper, faint but undeniable. The syllables stretched like wind through a hollow beam. Henry. Come back. He stepped back from the receiver, heart hammering, staring at the instrument as though it had turned itself inside out. No one else was in the lab. No one else should have known that name in that tone of voice. "Marion," he breathed. But Marion Alcott had been dead for 6 months. That night, Henry didn't go home. He poured bourbon into a coffee mug and sat staring at the radio long after the university's power had been cut off. Somewhere, a streetcar screeched around a corner. The faint jazz of a phonograph echoed from the next building. He thought about her face, her hands, the hollow where her collarbone met her throat, the living geometry of her, now gone. Grief was supposed to fade, wasn't it? That's what the doctors said. That's what his colleagues said when they shook his hand at the funeral and looked at the ground. But Henry's grief had not faded. It had only changed color, like bruised fruit. And now, somehow, it was talking back. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Heavy parchment, embossed with a sigil that looked like an eye in a triangle. Inside was a note written in looping black ink. Dr. Alcott, we are most intrigued by your recent experiments in wave capture and spiritual resonance. If you are interested in a demonstration of similar phenomena, you are invited to Waverly Hill on the night of August 3rd. Yours in science and spirit, Dr. Lillian Harrow, the Glasshouse Society. Henry turned the letter over, half expecting it to vanish. Waverly Hill was a name that carried weight. A mansion on the outskirts of Salem, owned by a family of spiritualists who had once been the darlings of the early 1900 seance circuit. Rumor had it that Thomas Edison himself had attended one of their scientific sittings before he died. The Glasshouse Society was said to blur the line between laboratory and seance parlor. Men of reason and women of vision, claiming to prove the persistence of the soul through machinery. It was everything Henry had been mocked for in the academic world. He didn't hesitate. He sent his reply that night. Waverly Hill rose from the Massachusetts coast like a mausoleum built for the living. Its facade of gray stone gleamed in the moonlight, the windows throwing back only darkness. The drive wound through ancient oaks and opened into a courtyard filled with motor cars and men in evening coats, women in sequined gowns. The hum of money and mystery filled the air. A servant took his hat and led him into the grand hall, where portraits of pale ancestors stared down from velvet shadows. The chandelier above him glittered like frozen rain. "Dr. Alcott," a voice said. A woman's voice, clear and resonant. He turned. She stood at the foot of the staircase, tall and elegant, dressed in black silk that caught the light like water. Her eyes were dark and alert, her lips the red of fresh ink. "I am Dr. Lillian Harrow," she said, extending a gloved hand. "I've been expecting you." Her handshake was firm and cool. She smiled in a way that suggested she already knew more about him than she should. "We've followed your papers on emotional resonance through frequency," she said, as they walked toward a long room lined with velvet drapes. "You believe that certain electrical signatures might carry remnants of human thought." "Believed," he said quietly. "My colleagues think it's absurd." "And yet," she said, pausing before a tall set of doors, "you came." Inside was the séance parlor. A long mahogany table gleamed beneath an array of copper instruments, wires, coils, crystal receivers, all carefully arranged around a ring of seats. The air smelled faintly of lavender and ozone. A phonograph played a low violin prelude. There were 6 other guests, professors, mediums, one journalist with a waxed mustache. On the wall hung a map of electromagnetic fields across New England, marked with pins where manifestations had been recorded. At the center of the table was a device that looked like an inverted chandelier, a tangle of glass tubes filled with faintly glowing gas. It pulsed softly, like a heart. Harrow gestured toward it. "We call it the conductor. It amplifies emotional residue, memories trapped in material form. The Victorians believed in ectoplasm. We believe in frequency." Henry couldn't look away. "And you've proven this works." Harrow's lips curved faintly. "You'll see." They began the séance at midnight. Hands joined around the table. The conductor hummed, its filaments vibrating in soft blue light. A phonograph needle spun without record, whispering static. Harrow's voice was low and steady. "We invite the spirits of the departed to commune through the medium of science. Let those bound by memory step forth into vibration and speak." The air grew heavy. Henry felt a pressure behind his eyes, a tingling in his fingertips. The lights flickered. The conductor began to pulse faster, each glow synchronized with his heartbeat. Then came the voice. It was unmistakable, soft, familiar. "Henry?" His breath caught. "Marion?" The guests gasped. Harrow leaned forward, eyes wide but controlled. "Dr. Alcott, focus on the memory. The frequency finds emotion." But he couldn't focus. Her voice was inside him, not just around him. A flood of sensations crashed through him. The scent of her perfume, the warmth of her breath, the sound of rain the night she died. And then, through the flickering haze of light and shadow, he saw her. At first, she was only a shape in the blue radiance, a distortion, a shimmer like heat above a flame. But it took form, molecule by molecule, until Marion stood there, half transparent, half alive, eyes filled with sorrow and something else, warning. Her lips moved soundlessly. Then, in a voice that wasn't entirely hers, "They want the doorway." The conductor flared hot white, glass cracked, someone screamed. The lights blew out, plunging the room into darkness. When the emergency lamps came on, the table was in ruins. Smoke rose from the shattered conductor. The guests were dazed but unharmed. Marion was gone, and Dr. Henry Alcott realized that whatever he had seen was not a ghost in the ordinary sense. It was something trying to come through.
The one with the waxed mustache, snorted. "Good show, Alcott. First-class hallucination. I dare say you should patent it." But Harrow didn't laugh. She flicked ash into a tray shaped like an open hand. "You saw someone familiar, didn't you?" Henry stared at her. "My wife, Marion." There was a silence heavy enough to crack. The other guests looked away. "I thought so," Harrow murmured. "They often come in the forms we most desire, or most dread. The conductor doesn't summon, it amplifies. The signal must have found its anchor in your grief." Henry shook his head. "No, it wasn't projection. She spoke to me, warned me." "Warned you of what?" He hesitated. "They want the doorway." The words pulsed like a heartbeat in his memory. Before he could answer, the lights flickered again. A hum rose from somewhere deep in the mansion, a low, tremulous vibration, like a bow drawn across a massive cello string. Every glass in the room trembled. "Good God!" someone whispered. The hum rose, then snapped into silence. And from the far end of the hall came a faint, echoing knock. 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. Harrow's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened around the cigarette holder. "It seems Waverly Hill isn't quite done with us tonight." They dispersed at dawn. The Glasshouse Society, shaken but not defeated, made polite excuses, electrical interference, unexpected feedback, and ushered their wealthy patrons back into the gray morning. The servants, wide-eyed and muttering, crossed themselves as they swept up the shards of glass. Henry stayed behind. He couldn't leave, not after what he had seen. Harrow found him in the library, seated beneath a portrait of the estate's original owner, a man with hollow eyes and a cruel mouth named Nathaniel Harrow, her grandfather. "You should rest," she said softly. "We'll rebuild the conductor once we understand what went wrong." Henry looked up. "Something came through your machine, and you're pretending it's just a technical glitch?" Her gaze flickered toward the window. "Pretending has kept this house quiet for years." He frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning," she said, setting her cigarette down on a brass tray, "the Harrow family built this house on the remains of something older. Waverly Hill was raised in 1879 over the foundation of a sanitarium that burned in the winter of 1856. The patients, 53 of them, were never found. The records say the fire was so intense that it left nothing but ash." Henry felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "You think the conductor awakened them?" Harrow had a short, humorless laugh. "The house remembers, Dr. Alcott. It hums with old frequencies. My grandfather tried to capture them. His daughter, my mother, claimed she could hear the whispers when she was a child. I built the conductor to understand them." He stood pacing. What if the emotion embedded here isn't peace or longing, but rage? Her eyes met his. "Then we've invited it to dinner." That night, Henry stayed in one of the guest rooms, a cavernous chamber with high ceilings and wallpaper patterned in faded gold leaves. Outside, the Atlantic howled against the cliffs. The wind pressed against the window panes as though it wanted in. He couldn't sleep. The gramophone in the corridor downstairs played faintly on a loop, though he hadn't heard anyone wind it. Somewhere in the distance, the pipes moaned like distant voices. Then just before 3, he heard it again. "Henry." He froze. The voice was soft, close, almost inside his ear. He turned slowly toward the vanity mirror. For an instant, the reflection wasn't his. It was Marian's face, pale and trembling behind the glass, her breath fogging the mirror from inside. "Henry," she whispered, her breath fogging the mirror from inside. The glass rippled like water, and then she was gone. Henry stumbled backward, gasping. His pulse thundered in his ears. From the hallway came footsteps, slow, deliberate. The doorknob turned. He grabbed the lamp from the nightstand. The door creaked open, and Harrow stood there in a silk dressing gown, eyes alert but calm. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she said. He nodded shakily. "I told you," she whispered, glancing toward the dark hall. "The house remembers, and it wants to speak." At dawn they went to the cellar. The staircase was narrow and cold, the air thick with the smell of damp stone. Harrow carried a lantern. Its circle of light flickered across walls etched with strange, overlapping carvings, spirals, concentric circles, sigils that looked half mathematical, half ritual. This was part of the sanitarium foundation. We discovered it years ago, sealed behind the wine racks. My grandfather called it the resonant chamber. The corridor opened into a large circular room beneath the mansion. Copper wires ran like veins through the walls, merging into a central dais where a rusted metal frame stood, like a crude version of the conductor. Henry stepped closer, examining the lattice of coils. "This looks like a transmitter." Harrow nodded. He believed thought could be broadcast like radio waves, that the mind's energy might survive death, encoded in the air itself. "And he built this to receive them? Or to contain them?" she said quietly. Henry ran a hand over the metal. It was warm, pulsing. He drew back sharply. "Good God, it's still active!" A faint hum filled the air. The lantern flickered. Then from the far wall, a voice whispered, many voices, overlapping, rising and falling like the tide. "We remember the fire, the pain, the doorway open." The air turned frigid, the lantern glass frosted over. Harrow's breath came in visible bursts. "They're trying to reach residents again. They think you're the key." "Me?" "Your wife's image, your grief. It gave them a signal to focus on. You've become a channel." The whispers grew louder, forming shapes in the air, a distortion like heat. Faces flickered, brief, human, and then monstrous. Henry's voice broke. "We have to shut this down." Harrow's hand tightened on the lantern. "I tried once. The last person who entered this chamber alone was my mother." "What happened to her?" Harrow's expression hardened. "The house kept her." The whispering stopped. For a brief moment, there was absolute silence. Then, faintly, from the darkness behind them, "Dr. Harrow, you shouldn't have come back." Harrow's face drained of color. The lantern died. They stumbled in the dark, breathless, groping for the stairs. Behind them, the hum became a roar, metal vibrating, voices shrieking like static. The air thickened with the smell of smoke, and Henry thought he saw shapes forming along the walls, bodies half made of light, half of ash. They reached the top of the stairs just as something heavy slammed against the cellar door from below. Once, twice. Harrow slammed the bolt into place, trembling.